North Korea proudly proclaims it has conducted a successful nuclear weapons test, provoking a global outcry and deep regional concern. But what can regional powers do to counter Pyongyang's nuclear ambitions? Are tougher sanctions the answer? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mike Hanna. North Korea has carried out its third nuclear test in defiance of international criticism. The test could bring North Korea one step closer to developing a warhead small enough to arm any of the many missile types it has stockpiled, which in turn could lead to other powers increasing their levels of nuclear deterrence in a new and deeply dangerous arms race. Many had hoped that Kim Jong Un would distance himself from the military-first policies of his father. But as Harry Fawcett reports, the test indicates that Pyongyang's foreign policy remains one rooted in flexing its military might.
For weeks from space, this remote mountain range in northern North Korea has been under close scrutiny. On Tuesday, the wait was over. Pyongyang said it had carried out a test of a miniaturized nuclear weapon in a tunnel at Punggye-ri.
This nuclear test, unlike the previous ones, was safely and perfectly conducted at a higher level by using a smaller and lighter nuclear bomb with high explosive power.
The statement, watched in a Pyongyang square, also made reference to a diversified nuclear arsenal, potentially a hint that for the first time, highly enriched uranium had been tested. The previous tests used plutonium as the bomb fuel. Whatever the material, it's clear that Pyongyang says it came in a smaller package. That claim, if true, marks a change in the calculus about North Korea's nuclear program. For years, governments here and in the United States have said North Korea was some way off having a miniaturized device suitable for use on top of a missile. At the very least, this test brings that prospect closer. Despite last year's successful rocket launch, North Korea has yet to develop a ballistic missile that could strike the US, the country against which it says its nuclear and missile programs are targeted. But a miniaturized bomb, according to one leading expert on North Korea's nuclear program, would embolden Pyongyang.
It will give them more confidence that they have a credible deterrent. I still personally believe that they want that deterrent to essentially keep the Americans out and to buy them sort of space and room in which they can operate.
In Seoul, the president, Im Myung-bak, held talks on the test with his successor. President-elect Park Geun-hye had promised greater engagement with Pyongyang in her campaign, a goal that she acknowledged had just become significantly harder. The country's military is on watch for North Korea's next move.
We have strengthened the readiness of our military by increasing the security alert level to level 2. We have also operated the South Korea-US joint surveillance platform to closely monitor North Korea's military movements.
Announcements in recent days in North Korean media had led to some speculation that the young leader, Kim Jong Un, might be backing away from a test. Instead, he's shown again that his leadership is just as immune to international pressure and condemnation as his fathers before him. Harry Fawcett, Al Jazeera, Seoul.
Well, joining us now are our guests. In Tokyo, Kunihiko Miyake. He's the research director of the Cannon Institute for Global Studies. In Hong Kong, Richard Hu. He's an associate professor in the Department of Politics and Public Administration at the University of Hong Kong. And in London, Mark Fitzpatrick. He's the director of the Non-Proliferation and Disarmament Program at the International Institute of Strategic Studies. Welcome to you all. Let's begin with Mark Fitzpatrick. To what extent does this threaten to alter the balance of power in the region?
I'm not sure that it alters the balance of power, but it gives North Korea a greater reliability in the warheads that it presumably will be mounting on missiles that already are proven to be able to hit all of South Korea and much of Japan. This affects the threat that North Korea's neighbors feel, and it impinges on China because Japan and South Korea will be building up their defenses in response. This will affect China's second strike capabilities and so forth. So the impact is negative for all of North Korea's neighbors.
Well, Kunihiko Miyake in Tokyo, it does appear that there could be a kind of domino effect occurring here, that each of the other nations stepping up their deterrent capacities.
Right. It's serious threat to Japan's peace and security, I believe, and probably it's a clear violation to the international law, including relevant UN resolutions. So I think what Japan has to do is to cooperate with the allies, Americans and South Koreans, to get united and have to get, in order to get tougher UN resolutions in close cooperation with China and Russia.
Well, Richard Hugh, how much of a threat do you believe this test presents?
I think it first increased the tension in the Korean Peninsula. Also, in some way, it changed the overall balance a little bit in the Northeast Asia, because a nuclear-armed North Korea obviously will be serious issues all power involved have to address, especially for China. This is a major foreign policy test for the new Chinese leadership.
Well, we're going to get into that particular point in a moment, but North Korea's nuclear test comes at a time of heightened tension in the region and has drawn broad criticism even from that long-standing regional ally, China. Despite its material and political support for North Korea, the latest tests seem to be testing China's patience. An article in the Global Times, a newspaper close to the Chinese government, had previously warned that North Korea would pay a heavy price if it proceeded with the test. Japan's Prime Minister has described the test as a grave threat that cannot be tolerated. Tuesday's test appeared to be timed to receive maximum international attention. China, Japan and South Korea are all undergoing sensitive political transitions, while US President Obama is beginning a second term. And South Korea currently holds the presidency of the UN Security Council, which is holding an emergency sitting. Well, it would appear, as we've already seen, that China is the key in dealing with this crisis. Are we going to see a tougher policy, perhaps under the new leadership of Xi Jinping? Kunihiko Miyake, what do you think?
Yeah, it could have been a golden opportunity for China to show its willingness to be more responsible for the stability in this part of the world. But unfortunately, it looks like they are not ready yet to put more pressure on North Korea. And simply because it is the collapse of North Korea could be a serious sort of a national security issue for China. So I believe that this time, this is the third round of the North Korean sort of provocative challenges with respect to the nuclear issue. And unfortunately, China seems to be failing to show its willingness to pressure North Korea to change their policy.
Well, Richard Hugh in Hong Kong, what's your opinion on this? Are we going to see a switch or a slight change in Chinese policy?
I think China will respond in its own way. And this is the third time North Korea tests nuclear weapons. And we see cycles, actually 3 cycles since 2006. And this time for the new leadership, I think there should be new thinking, and a lot of people calling for new thinking on China's China's North Korean policy. So we'll have to see. But I'm pretty sure the new leadership will take a tougher stand on North Korea's nuclear test. You already see the foreign minister make an unprecedented move, summoned the North Korean ambassador to Beijing to lodge, the foreign minister lodged a strong protest, and China used very strong language to condemn North Korea. And also what we'll see is the UN sanctions. China will join the sanction, and China will discuss what are the appropriate measures to sanction North Korea this time.
Well, Mark Fitzpatrick, your view, do you think there is going to be a shift in Chinese policy brought about by this latest test?
I think there will be some shift. Already there's been a shift in public opinion among the academic communities in China. Some of the articles that have been printed have been exceedingly critical of North Korea. And then the state media, the Global Times, issuing this a very strong caution. There are three things that China could do. One would be to go along with other parties in adopting a new round of UN Security Council sanctions. These will probably add a few more entities to the blacklist of North Korean individuals and companies that are involved with the nuclear program, freeze them out of international commerce. That's one thing. Second thing is implementing the sanctions that are already in place. Much of the equipment and materials that go into North Korea's nuclear and missile program from outside countries transits China. China could really clamp down on this. It doesn't have to adopt any new legislation, any new international methods, just clamp down, implement what it's already agreed in theory to do. And then the third thing is stop some of China's unilaterally stop some of China's assistance to North Korea. Like had been done back in 2003, the oil pipeline was shut off temporarily during the first North Korean nuclear crisis. North Korea depends on China for oil, for much of its food, for most of its investment. China can display its anger in various ways. It has a lot of levers. Whether it can actually change North Korean policy is another matter, but it can certainly demonstrate its anger.
Well, Kunihiko Miyake, we heard there suggestions of unilateral action perhaps by China, particularly cutting off that oil pipeline, which would be a considerable threat to South Korea,
well,
North Korea, would it not?
Yes, I really hope that what Mark said is going to happen. But unfortunately, the North Koreans don't trust the Chinese. And it's very unfortunate, but there's a limit to what China can do to North Korea with respect to not only the nuclear weapon program, but also the regime itself, survival itself. So it is, I'm still a little bit skeptical, and but I sincerely hope that what Mark has said is going to take place.
Well, Richard Hugh, how far do you believe that China could go or indeed would go?
I think for a long time, China in a dilemma situations. China want to send a strong message to North Korea. North Korea should stop its nuclear programs, no longer conduct any new tests, including missile tests. But North Korean, as the earlier speaker says, probably would not listen to China. So China's leverage on North Korea is limited. On the other hand, China want to use more peaceful way to persuade North Korea and come to the negotiation table to find a peaceful solution to this nuclear crisis. So China is trying to work on both way. But it looked like this dual-track policy is not working very well over last decade maybe, and so China probably will have to try something new. And but there's a little bottom line on China, which is China doesn't want to see North Korea completely collapse, and this is not good for the region, not good for China as well. So China is still trying to join others, put a limited sanction on North Korea and persuade that country back to the negotiation table and then give up its nuclear program. On the other hand, China is trying to facilitate peace and negotiation talks and give North Korea a chance. But now I think the peace, the chance for peace, it seems not very good. So this time, I guess China will agree with other countries to have a stronger and a tougher sanction on North Korea through United Nations Security Council.
Well, we'll look at the issue of sanctions in a moment, but let's just pause here and take a look at the nuclear haves and the have-nots and the might-haves. The Big Five, the first 5 countries develop and test nuclear weapons, also have veto power in the UN Security Council. They are the United States, Russia, China, Britain and France. 4 other countries have either tested nuclear weapons or are believed to have them. They include Israel, which has never acknowledged its weapons program, India and Pakistan, both of which are thought to have around 50 nuclear warheads, and North Korea, which carried out its 3rd test Tuesday. Some allege Iran has a nuclear weapons program, though there's no conclusive evidence the country is attempting to produce a bomb. While South Africa is one of the few countries to completely dismantle its weapons program. That list includes former Soviet states like Belarus and Ukraine. But let's clarify at this point one thing. Why is the North Korean nuclear weapons program regarded as such a threat by other members of the nuclear club? Richard Hugh, your view.
I think North Korean have the motivation to go that way because the security environment it faces in the Korean Peninsula and also faces the pressures from U.S. and its allies in the Northeast Asia. So North Korean use the military first policy to confront the outside powers. And so that make North Korean a country very, very tough to deal with. I think it has determined to have nuclear bombs, to becoming a nuclear have countries. In that way, it has bargaining power or leverage to deal with U.S. and to deal with the South.
Well, Mark Fitzpatrick in London, it appears that this nuclear development is very much part of its foreign policy, that it is creating a nuclear weapons program as part of a way of dealing with the world as a whole.
Well, I think it's very much part of North Korea's defense policy. They see nuclear weapons as the only way of ensuring the survivability of the regime. They see themselves as living in an area of the world where they face hostile neighbors, and they talk about hostility of the United States. But they have a very warped sense of history. They think they were the ones that were attacked in the Korean War, for example, when we all know it was them who started the war. The United States and Japan are not about to attack North Korea or invade it. In fact, the United States and Japan, South Korea, all pledged in 2005 that they had no intention. They recognized the sovereignty of North Korea. You know, the sad thing about this development is that by testing right when a new president is about to come to power in South Korea, testing when a new leader in China, both of these countries are in a position to assist North Korea out of its poverty trap. Even the United States was ready last year to provide food aid and get on better relations. But rather than accepting food aid and creating an environment where investment and trade can flourish, things that are very much necessary for North Korea to get out of its poverty, they've taken the exact opposite route. They've placed guns over butter, and it means that their people will remain impoverished, and all they can look to with pride is nuclear weapons and missiles. What kind of a situation is that?
Well, Kunihiko Miyake, why do you believe that this policy has evolved in North Korea?
Well, I agree with Mark in that that weapon itself is for their survival, and not necessary to attack others, because if they did, that would be the end of their regime. So they really want to survive. But as far as the Japan is concerned, probably the North Korean nuke would not lead to nuclear armament of Japan or any other country in this part of the world. As compared to the Middle East, I think the seriousness is there in the Middle East. In Iran, if they are nuclear armed themselves, then probably that would trigger a nuclear proliferation in that part of the world. But in the case of North Korea, this is really for the survival of their regime, and it will not trigger something serious as we may witness in the Middle East in the future.
Well, Mark Fitzpatrick in London, we heard their mention of Iran. Now, some have speculated that this could have been a two countries test, North Korea and Iran reputedly working together in terms of nuclear development. Is any veracity or any foundation in that, do you believe?
I hesitate to say with any confidence that the two nations are sharing nuclear weapons related technology. But there is some evidence that they have been. I mean, first of all, they have a very strong relationship in developing ballistic missiles. It's a two-way relationship. Secondly, there is a technology exchange that is open and public. It was strengthened last autumn. A new trade technology pact was signed. And who came to that signing ceremony is very interesting. The head of Iran's Atomic Energy Commission and the defense minister. This is for cooperation with North Korea. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if Iranian engineers and scientists were in North Korea to observe the test. I don't have any confirmation of that. But I wouldn't be surprised if they're sharing information. They're both states that are classified as rogue states. States that are outliers in relation to international norms, and they only have each other to look for, and not very good allies to have.
Well, Richard Hu in Hong Kong, your opinion on that speculation of some kind of two-country testing happening?
Like Mark, I don't have evidence to justify what the speculations. I think. On the missile side, the people say there's cooperation. On the nuclear side, we don't have hard evidence to show that. But I think in terms of support, spiritual support of each other, North Korea and Iran pretty much on the same page. They support each other, and then North Koreans test. I think. Becoming a role model for Iran to follow in the future.
Well, let's just have a look at some comments on our Facebook page. Salik says, again, media ignores nuclear weapons of Israel and the US. They are the greatest threats to the world. They pose greater threat than North Korean nukes. Abdul Rashid warns, don't involve China in your crusade against North Korea. China and North Korea are good. The policy of the enemy of my enemy is my friend can only work in Syria, but not between North Korea and China. Jeff says North Korea receives a lot of worldwide aid, mostly food and medicine. Any country that can afford to develop a nuclear program can also afford to feed and medicate its people. Step 1 is to cut off all aid. Step 2 is to force North Korea to sustain itself through trade sanctions. But Jonier argues that imposing more sanctions on North Korea has never and will never work. Well, the UN Security Council is meeting. The issue of sanctions is once again on the table. But Kunihiko Miyake, why would sanctions work now when they haven't worked before, do you believe?
Well, probably we will put a little bit more pressure than before, but it doesn't lead to a real effective sanctions against North Korea. So I'm afraid to say this is a third round, I said, and probably there will be a fourth and fifth round. And by the time they have a fifth round, maybe they may have 5 tests and 5 launches, and probably the warhead will be getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And that could be the nightmare for Japan.
Well, Richard Hu, your answer to that? Why should sanctions work this time? Do sanctions work at all in this case?
I think sanction is a way we respond to North Korea's test, but sanction cannot solve the problem. We have, as an earlier speaker says, this is the third round. We see a cycle: sanction, tension, confrontation, and then calm down, and then back to the negotiation table, and then negotiation collapse, and then tension again. So this is the third round of the cycle. I don't want to see the cycle continued like this. We need to find a way to break the cycle. I think the negotiations focus on nuclear weapon itself. Yes, that's right. But we need to have a more comprehensive package to deal with these issues. So we need to have 6-party talks address the whole Northeast Asian security problem, not just nuclear issues of North Korea.
Well, a dangerous cycle indeed. And at that point, my thanks to our guests, Kunihiko Miyake, Richard Hu, and Mark Fitzpatrick. And thank you for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. We'd like to hear your opinions, and our email address is insidestory@aljazeera.net. Thanks again for watching. I'm Mike Hanna. Goodbye for now.